The auctioneer's gavel slammed down on emptiness. Not one man in Red Hollow would bid on the Irish woman they called cursed. She stood on that block with rope burns on her wrists and murder accusations in her shadow, and the whole town held its breath waiting for her to be dragged back to whatever hell she'd escaped from. Then a limping cowboy with war-dark eyes rode forward and spoke two words that changed everything. $10. Sometimes salvation comes from the most broken places. Stay with me until the end and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The Wyoming sun beat down on Red Hollow like God's own hammer, turning the main street into a river of dust and desperation. August of 1875 had been merciless, the kind of summer that dried wells and shortened tempers where even the wind felt too exhausted to blow. Caleb Rourke felt every mile of the 3-day ride in his bones as he guided his mare, Juniper, toward what passed for civilization in this corner of the territory. He'd only meant to stop for supplies. Maybe a hot meal, maybe a night in a real bed instead of hard ground with nothing but saddle leather for a pillow. His left leg throbbed with that deep, endless ache that had been his companion since Antietam, 13 years gone, but never forgotten. The Confederate Minié ball that shattered his femur had been removed by a battlefield surgeon whose hands shook more than steady, and Caleb had walked crooked ever since, carrying that war inside his body like an unwelcome guest who'd never learned to leave. The town square opened up before him, a sad collection of false front buildings trying to pretend they were more than they were. Mitchell's Dry Goods, the Red Hollow Saloon, a farrier's shop with a broken sign, the usual territorial optimism built on hope and timber that wouldn't last the decade. Caleb had seen a dozen towns just like it, and he'd see a dozen more before his brother's ranch in Sweet Creek finally gave him a place to stop moving. But today, Red Hollow had drawn a crowd. Caleb noticed it immediately, that particular quality of attention that comes when people gather to witness something they know isn't quite right but can't look away from. 50, maybe 60 people clustered around a raised wooden platform in the square's center. The auction block. Caleb's jaw tightened. He knew what happened on auction blocks, even this far north, even this long after the war that was supposed to have settled such things. He should have ridden past, should have kept Juniper moving toward the general store, minded his own business like he'd learned to do. The world was full of injustice, and one broken-down ex-cavalry scout couldn't fix it all. Hell, he could barely fix himself. But something made him stop. Maybe it was the unusual silence of the crowd. No jeering, no excited bidding, just an uncomfortable hush broken only by the auctioneer's increasingly desperate patter. Maybe it was the way grown men were backing away from the platform instead of pressing forward. Or maybe it was just that Caleb had been riding alone for too long, with nothing but memories and pain for company, and some part of him that wasn't quite dead yet recognized another living soul in trouble. He dismounted slowly, favoring his good leg, and limped closer. The woman on the auction block stood like a candle that refused to blow out. She couldn't have been more than 25, though hardship had a way of aging faces that made such guesses uncertain. Her dark red hair had come loose from whatever pins had tried to contain it, falling in waves around a face too thin, too pale, marked by sleepless nights and worse days. Her dress was gray homespun, torn at the shoulder, stained with travel and terror. Rope had been tied around her wrists, not tight enough to cut, but secure enough to broadcast her status, property, not person. But it was her eyes that stopped Caleb cold. Green as bottle glass, fierce as prairie fire, they blazed out of that exhausted face with an intensity that had nothing to do with defeat. She was afraid. He could see that in the way she held herself rigid, in the slight tremor of her bound hands, but she wasn't broken. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The auctioneer, a pot-bellied man with sweat stains spreading under his arms, mopped his forehead with a handkerchief that had long since given up on cleanliness. "Now, gentlemen, let's be reasonable here," he called out, his voice carrying that particular wheedle of a man trying to sell something nobody wants. "This here is Maeve Callahan, lately of Philadelphia. Strong worker, literate, knows her way around a sick room and a kitchen both." "She's a witch," someone shouted from the back of the crowd. The word cut through the afternoon heat like a blade. Now, the auctioneer protested weakly, but the damage was done. The crowd shifted, uneasy. Men who'd been considering, however briefly, making a bid now found urgent reasons to study their boots. She killed a child back east, another voice added, this one belonging to a hard-faced woman in severe black. Fever took the boy right after she laid hands on him. His mother found devil marks in the room. I tried to save him. Maeve's voice rang out clear and sharp, cutting through the accusations with the precision of truth. Her accent carried the music of Ireland, softened but not erased by years in America. The fever was too far gone. I did everything. Silence! The auctioneer raised his hand. Though whether to quiet Maeve or the crowd, Caleb couldn't tell. The lady's past is her past. Indentured contracts for 7 years of labor, nothing more. She cooks, she cleans, she's got healing knowledge. Who'll start the bidding? $5? Silence. $3? A wind kicked up dust devils in the street. Somewhere a dog barked. Nobody moved. Caleb found himself pushing through the crowd without conscious decision, his bad leg protesting every step. Up close, he could see more details that turned his stomach. Bruises on Maeve's arms, yellow-green and fading, a cut on her lower lip, recently healed, signs of a rough journey and rougher handling. What's to happen to her, he called out. If nobody bids? The auctioneer looked relieved to have any engagement at all. Well, sir, that's between the lady and the gentleman what holds her contract. Brought her all the way from Pennsylvania, he did, hoping to recoup his investment. He gestured toward a thin man leaning against a nearby post, watching the proceedings with the dead eyes of someone who'd long since stopped caring about anything but money. Mr. Sykes there. He's got other options if Red Hollow won't bite. Caleb looked at Sykes and knew exactly what those options were. There were mining camps in the mountains where women disappeared. There were houses in Denver where indentured contracts became something darker. There were 100 ways a desperate man could profit from a woman nobody wanted to protect. His eyes met Maeve's. For a moment, the crowd, the auctioneer, the whole dusty town fell away. He saw the pleas she was too proud to speak. He saw the fear she was too stubborn to show. He saw himself reflected in those green eyes, another piece of human wreckage the world had tried to throw away. The words came out before his better judgment could stop them. $10. The crowd gasped. The auctioneer's face split in a grin of pure relief. Sykes pushed off from his post, suddenly interested. $10, the auctioneer crowed. We have $10 for the girl. Going once. You're making a mistake, friend, a bearded man next to Caleb warned, low and urgent. That woman's got a shadow on her. Child died under her care. Some say she called the fever herself. Some kind of Irish black magic. You bring her into your house. You're bringing the devil's own. Going twice? Caleb never took his eyes off Maeve. I don't believe in devils, he said quietly. Just people. And she looks like she could use a fair shake. Sold. The gavel came down like a gunshot. To the gentleman with the cavalry limp. Sir, if you'll settle up with Mr. Sykes. The transaction took less than 5 minutes. Caleb counted out his coins. Money he'd earned scouting for wagon trains. Money he'd planned to use for supplies and maybe a new shirt, while Sykes examined each one with the suspicious care of a man who'd been cheated before. The contract changed hands, a water-stained piece of paper that gave Caleb Rourke 7 years of Maeve Callahan's life in exchange for $10 silver and the promise to provide food, shelter, and clothing. It made him sick to hold it. She's trouble, Sykes said, pocketing the money. Don't say I didn't warn you. Got a mouth on her, that one. Too smart for her own good. And whatever she is, healer or witch, she's got something unnatural about her. You'll see. Then I guess it's my trouble now, Caleb replied. He walked back to the auction block where Maeve still stood with her wrists bound, watching him approach with an expression he couldn't quite read. The crowd was dispersing now that the entertainment had ended, drifting back toward saloons and shops, already forgetting the woman they'd condemned. Caleb pulled his knife from his belt. Maeve flinched, barely, but he saw it, before understanding what he meant to do. Hold still, he said, and cut the ropes. They fell away like dead snakes. Maeve rubbed her wrist, not looking at him, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. I'm Caleb Rourke, he finally offered. I don't know what I just did exactly, but I know it wasn't right, you standing up there like that. You bought me. Her voice was flat, carefully empty of emotion. Same as a horse, or a plow. I bought a piece of paper. He held up the contract, then deliberately tore it in half, then in half again. Now I'm destroying it. You're free, Miss Callahan. Free as any of us get to be in this world. She stared at the torn pieces fluttering to the ground, then back up at his face, searching for the trick, the catch, the hidden cost. Why? It was the simplest question and the hardest one. Why had he done it? Because she looked like dignity trying not to break? Because those green eyes reminded him of hope before the war killed it? Because he was so damn tired of walking past injustice and pretending it wasn't his business? Because I could, he said, which was true but not the whole truth. And because nobody else would. They said I killed a child. She said it like a test, watching for his reaction. Did you? I tried to save him. Robbie Whelan, 6 years old, burning up with fever. His mother called me too late. The infection had gone to his brain. I gave him willow bark, kept cool cloths on his head, prayed over him like my grandmother taught me. But he died just before dawn. And when his mother found me crying over him, she started screaming that I'd cursed him, that I was a witch, that I'd killed her boy. Tears glittered in her eyes, but didn't fall. His father was a magistrate. He had me arrested, tried, convicted of witchcraft and murder. They were going to hang me. But Sykes showed up with papers, bought my sentence, converted it to indenture. He said he was saving my life. He said I'd work for him for 7 years and the debt would be paid. But he was just planning to sell you to the highest bidder, or the lowest, as it turns out. A bitter smile flickered across her face. $10, that's what I'm worth. No. Caleb's voice was sharp enough that she looked up, startled. That's what a piece of paper was worth. You're worth a hell of a lot more than that, Miss Callahan, and don't let anyone, including yourself, tell you different. She studied him with those fierce green eyes, and Caleb felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with the sun beating down on them. What do you want from me? She asked. Men don't do kindness for free. I want... He paused, considering. What did he want? I'm heading west to my brother's ranch in Sweet Creek, about a week's ride from here. It's good country, they say. My brother Michael wrote that he's got more land than he knows what to do with, and he's offered me a piece of it. Fresh start, new life, all that frontier nonsense. He gestured at the torn contract pieces scattered in the dust. I don't want a servant, Miss Callahan. But if you're looking for a place to go, somewhere you can start over where nobody knows your name or your story, you're welcome to ride with me. My brother's wife is a good woman. She'd help you get settled. And Sweet Creek's growing fast enough that they could use a healer, if that's what you want to be. Maeve was quiet for a long time, thinking. Around them, Red Hollow went about its business, ignoring the ex-soldier and the accused witch standing in the town square having a conversation that might change both their lives. I don't know you, she said finally. You could be worse than Sykes. I could be, Caleb agreed. But I'm not. All I'm offering is a ride west and an introduction to my family. What you do after that is your business. And if I say no, then I'll give you enough money for a stage ticket anywhere you want to go, and you'll never see me again. She looked around at Red Hollow, at the people who'd called her witch, at the auction block where she'd stood in ropes, at the West that had seemed like freedom until it turned into just another kind of prison. When do we leave? She asked. First light tomorrow. I'll get us a couple of rooms at the boarding house, buy supplies. You need anything? Everything, she said simply. I have nothing but this dress and the shoes on my feet. Caleb thought of his dwindling funds and the long ride ahead and decided it didn't matter. Then we'll get you everything. Come on. They walked through Red Hollow together, the limping cowboy and the woman nobody wanted, and if people stared, Caleb ignored them. He set Maeve up in a room at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, a clean space with a lock on the door which seemed important, and then took her to Mitchell's Dry Goods. The proprietor, a nervous man with spectacles, served them warily, but money was money. Caleb bought Maeve a practical split skirt for riding, 2 cotton blouses, a wool coat for cold nights, sturdy boots, a hat to keep the sun off. He added a bedroll, a tin cup, a knife of her own. This is too much, Maeve protested as the pile grew. I can't pay you back. Not asking you to. Consider it investment in not dying of exposure on the trail. At the boarding house that evening, Mrs. Henderson served them a dinner of stew and biscuits. They ate in silence, Exhaustion and uncertainty sitting between them like a third party. Caleb noticed the way Maeve ate, quickly, defensively, like someone who'd learned not to trust that food would still be there in 5 minutes. It made his chest ache. "Tell me about this healing," he said finally, pushing his bowl aside. "What you did for that boy. What you do." Maeve set down her spoon carefully. "My grandmother was a Bean-Leggis, a healing woman, back in County Cork. She taught me before I was 10. Herbs, poultices, bone setting, but it's more than recipes. It's—" She struggled for words. "It's knowing, feeling. When I touch someone who's ill, I can sense where the sickness lives, like heat under skin or coldness where warmth should be. My hands know what to do." "And the witchcraft accusations? People fear what they don't understand. A gift becomes a curse when someone needs someone to blame." Her voice hardened. "Robbie Whelan died because I was called too late, and fever doesn't care how much you know. But it's easier to blame the Irish witch than admit that sometimes children die, and there's no reason, no justice, just cruel chance." Caleb thought of the war, of friends who died in his arms for no better reason than they'd been standing in the wrong place when metal flew through air. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I know about that." Something passed between them then, recognition, maybe. The understanding that they'd both seen darkness and survived it, even if they carried the scars. "Your leg," Maeve said, nodding toward where he'd stretched it out under the table. "Old wound?" "Antietam, 1862. Confederate ball, Union surgeon, bad combination." "Does it pain you?" "Every day. Every step. Every time the weather changes." He said it matter-of-factly, a truth he'd long since accepted. Maeve was quiet for a moment, then, "I could help, not cure it. The damage is old, set wrong. But I could ease it, help you sleep without the ache." "I don't have money for—" "I'm not asking for money." She met his eyes. "You gave me freedom today. Let me give you a night without pain. Fair trade." Caleb wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain the distance, the boundaries, the walls that had kept him safe and alone for 13 years. But the truth was, he was so tired. Tired of hurting, tired of pretending he didn't hurt. "All right," he said. In his room, small, sparse, clean, Maeve had him sit on the bed and remove his boot. She knelt before him, which felt wrong, made him uncomfortable, but she waved away his protest. "Be still," she commanded, and placed her hands on either side of his leg, just above the old wound. Her touch was warm, not hot, but present in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Caleb felt something shift under his skin, a loosening, an easing. The constant throb that had been his companion for 13 years didn't disappear, but it softened, like someone had turned down a lantern that had been burning too bright for too long. "Jesus," he breathed. "Not him," Maeve said with the first real smile he'd seen from her. "Just me, and whatever gift my grandmother gave me." She worked in silence for several minutes, her fingers finding places along his leg that hurt even worse when she pressed them, then slowly stopped hurting at all. When she finished, she sat back on her heels, looking exhausted. "That's the best I can do without herbs and time, but it should help you sleep tonight." It's, Caleb stood, testing his weight on the leg. The pain was still there, would always be there, but diminished, manageable. "Thank you." "Thank you," she countered, "for buying a woman nobody wanted, for setting her free, for not being the monster she expected." They stood in the small room, the evening light fading through the window, two broken people who'd found each other by accident in a dusty Wyoming town. "I'll be a good traveling companion," Maeve said. "I won't slow you down. I can ride, I can cook, I can help if trouble comes. You won't regret bringing me." "I don't regret it," Caleb said, and found that he meant it. That night, for the first time in years, he slept without the ache. And in the room next door, Maeve Callahan slept with a locked door between her and the world, dreaming of what freedom might look like when the sun rose. They left Red Hollow at first light, two riders heading west into country that promised nothing but possibility. Behind them, the town woke to another day of heat and hardship. Ahead of them, the Rattlesnake Range rose blue and distant against the morning sky. Neither of them looked back. The trail stretched out before them, uncertain and long. But for the first time in longer than either could remember, the future felt like something other than just more road to travel. It felt almost like hope. The first 3 days passed in careful silence, each mile putting more distance between Maeve and the auction block, between Caleb and the decision he still wasn't sure he understood. They rode steadily west, following wagon ruts and game trails through country that opened up like a promise the land couldn't quite keep. The Rattlesnake Range loomed closer each day, purple-gray mountains that seemed to float above the prairie like a mirage made solid. Maeve proved herself a capable rider, sitting her borrowed mare with the easy competence of someone who'd grown up around horses. Caleb had worried she might slow them down, but she matched his pace without complaint, even when the sun beat down merciless and the water in their canteens grew warm and stale. She didn't talk much, seemed content to let the distance accumulate in silence, and Caleb found himself grateful for it. He'd spent so long alone that conversation felt like a skill he'd forgotten how to use. But on the fourth morning, as they broke camp beside a narrow creek that cut through red stone country, Maeve finally broke the quiet that had stretched between them like a truce neither wanted to end. "You never told me about your brother," she said, rolling up her bedroll with practiced efficiency. "The one in Sweet Creek." Caleb looked up from checking Juniper's shoes, surprised by the question. "Michael? Not much to tell. He's 5 years younger than me, came west after the war, married a woman named Sarah, bought land, started building something that lasts. Everything I never managed to do." "You sound bitter." "Not bitter, just honest." He straightened, testing his weight on his bad leg. The pain was still there, but manageable, thanks to whatever Maeve had done that first night. She'd worked on it twice more since then, her hands finding the hurt and gentling it, never quite erasing it, but making it bearable. Michael always knew what he wanted: home, family, roots. "I just knew I wanted to keep moving." "Until now?" "Until now," he admitted. "I'm 38 years old, got nothing to show for it but scars and a horse. Figured maybe it's time to stop running from whatever I've been running from." Maeve poured out the last of the coffee, watching steam rise in the cool morning air. "And what have you been running from?" The question hit deeper than she probably meant it to. Caleb busied himself with his saddlebags, giving himself time to decide how much truth to offer. "Ghosts," he said finally. "The kind that live in your head. Men I killed. Friends who died. A whole war's worth of memories that don't let me sleep right." "But you slept well these past nights." He met her eyes across the dying campfire. "Yeah, I did. Thanks to you." Something passed between them then, fragile as morning frost. Acknowledgement that they were connected now, bound by something more than convenience or pity. She'd given him relief from pain he'd carried for 13 years. He'd given her freedom when the whole world wanted her in chains. It made them responsible for each other in ways neither had asked for, but both were starting to accept. They mounted up and rode on, the silence between them easier now, almost comfortable. The land changed as they climbed higher, prairie giving way to foothills, grass to scrub pine. The air smelled of sage and coming weather, that particular electricity that meant storms building somewhere beyond the horizon. By mid-afternoon, clouds had gathered overhead, dark and heavy with intent. Caleb watched them with growing unease. Late summer storms in mountain country came fast and mean, turning trails to mud and creeks to torrents in minutes. They needed shelter, but the landscape offered precious little, just exposed slopes and narrow draws that would funnel water like God's own sluice. "We should find cover," Maeve said, reading the sky with the same concern Caleb felt. "Not much around. There's supposed to be a way station another 10 miles on, but—" Thunder rolled across the hills, cutting him off. Juniper danced sideways, nervous. The first drops of rain hit like thrown pebbles, hard and cold. "Move," Caleb said, and they pushed the horses into a ground-eating lope, racing the storm that was already winning. The rain came all at once, a solid wall of water that turned the world gray and furious. Within minutes, Caleb was soaked through, his hat channeling water like a broken gutter. He could barely see Maeve riding beside him, just a dark shape in the downpour. The trail disappeared under rushing water, rocks and roots hidden beneath a surface that wanted to kill horses and riders both. "There!" Maeve shouted, pointing toward an outcropping of stone 50 yards off the trail. "Overhang!" They made for it. the horses struggling through mud that grabbed at their hooves. Lightning cracked so close Caleb felt it in his teeth, and thunder followed immediately, no gap for counting, the storm right on top of them now. He could hear water roaring somewhere close, a sound that raised every alarm instinct the war had taught him. The overhang was barely adequate, a shelf of rock jutting out from the hillside, maybe 8 feet deep and twice as wide. But it was dry, or dry enough, and it got them out of the rain that was now coming sideways, driven by wind that howled like something alive and angry. They tumbled off their horses, pulled them as far back under the stone as possible, stood there dripping and gasping while the storm raged 10 feet away. Caleb's leg throbbed from the hard ride, but he ignored it, too focused on the sound he'd heard, the roaring that was getting louder. "Flash flood," he said, and pointed down into the draw below them. "That's a dry wash most of the year, but when it rains—" Even as he spoke, water appeared, not a gradual rise, but a sudden presence, a churning brown wall that filled the draw from bank to bank in seconds, carrying trees and boulders and debris in its chaotic rush. If they'd been down there, if they'd kept to the trail that followed the draw, they'd be dead. Simple as that. Drowned and swept away and gone. Maeve stared at the torrent, her face pale in the gray light. "Sweet Mary," she breathed. "We would have, but we didn't." Caleb touched her shoulder, needing to ground himself as much as comfort her. "Your eyes caught that overhang. You saved us." She nodded, still shaken, and they both realized simultaneously that they were standing very close, his hand still on her shoulder, her hair plastered to her face, water dripping from both of them. The moment stretched, charged with something that had nothing to do with the storm. Caleb stepped back, cleared his throat. "We're stuck here until this passes. Could be an hour, could be all night." "All night," Maeve said, looking at the sky, at the unrelenting rain. "This won't quit soon." She was right. The storm settled in with the determination of weather that had nowhere else to be, rain drumming steadily on stone, wind pushing it in occasional gusts that reached even their shelter. The temperature dropped. Within an hour, they were both shivering despite their coats, wet wool being worse than useless against the cold. Caleb tried to build a fire with wood he found at the back of the overhang, old branches left by some previous traveler. But everything was damp, and the wind kept killing his matches. After the 6th attempt, he gave up, cursing his own incompetence. "Here!" Maeve knelt beside him, her hands shaking with cold. "Let me try." Together they coaxed a tiny flame to life, feeding it with the driest splinters they could find, breathing on it like it was a newborn thing that might die without their care. It caught, finally, a small fire that gave more light than heat, but felt like victory anyway. They huddled close to it, shoulders touching, trying to capture warmth that kept escaping. The horses stood nearby, patient as saints, their breath steaming in the cold air. Below, the flood raged on, a reminder of how close death always was in country like this. "Tell me about Ireland," Caleb said, needing distraction from the cold, from the awareness of Maeve pressed against his side. "About growing up there." Maeve was quiet for a moment, staring into the small fire. "County Cork," she said finally. "Green hills that go on forever, rain that never quite stops, stone walls older than memory. My grandmother's cottage on the edge of Ballincollig, where she taught me everything she knew about healing." "Why did you leave?" "The hunger." Her voice went flat, reciting facts too painful for emotion. 1847. I was 7 years old. The potatoes rotted in the ground, turned black and stinking. People died by the thousands. Starvation, fever, despair. My parents died. My baby brother. My grandmother got me on a ship to Boston, spent everything she had left. She said I had the gift, that I couldn't waste it rotting in Ireland when America needed healers. And she stayed behind? She was old. Too old for the crossing, she said. But I think, Maeve's voice caught. I think she just wanted to die in the place she'd lived. She sent me away so I'd have a chance. I never saw her again. Caleb thought of his own mother, dead of cholera when he was 15. Thought of all the ways the world took people you loved and left you standing in the aftermath, trying to figure out how to keep breathing. I'm sorry, he said, knowing it wasn't enough, but offering it anyway. What about you? Maeve turned to look at him, firelight catching in her green eyes. What was your life before the war? Ohio farm, good land, good family. My father raised horses, taught me and Michael everything about them. Simple life, happy enough. Then Fort Sumter happened, and I was 19 and stupid enough to think war was glory. Enlisted the first day I could, and found out different. Found out war is mud and blood and watching boys die calling for their mothers. He heard the bitterness in his own voice, tried to soften it. I was cavalry. Scouted, carried messages, fought when I had to. Got through 3 years before Antietam put me on my back for 6 months. By the time I could walk again, something had broken inside me. Not just the leg. Something else. Something that knew how to be home. So you kept moving. Kept moving. Scouted for wagon trains. Hired on as ranch hand here and there. Never stayed anywhere longer than a season. Figured that was just who I was now. A man with no roots, no destination. Just motion. They sat in silence, the fire crackling, the rain steady as time. Caleb felt the cold seeping deeper, felt Maeve shivering against him. Without thinking about it too much, he put his arm around her, pulling her closer. She stiffened for just a second, then relaxed, accepting the warmth, the comfort, the simple human contact that both of them had been starved for. "This is improper," she murmured, but didn't pull away. "Dying of cold is improper too. I figure we've got to choose our sins." She laughed at that, a surprise sound that warmed him more than the fire did. "You're not what I expected, Caleb Rourke." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone harder, maybe. More like the men who bought and sold me, but you're—" She paused, choosing words carefully. "You're decent, kind even. It's unexpected. Don't make me out to be better than I am. I've done things in my life I'm not proud of. Killed men. Made mistakes. Failed people who trusted me. But you're trying to be better. That counts for something." Did it? Caleb wasn't sure. He'd spent 13 years running from who he'd been, and he still didn't know who he was trying to become. But sitting here in the cold and the dark with this fierce Irish woman pressed against his side, he felt something shift. A possibility. A glimpse of a life that might include more than just survival. "Your leg," Maeve said suddenly. "It's hurting. I can feel it." "It's fine." "It's not." She pulled back to look at him, her healer's instinct overriding everything else. "The cold makes it worse, doesn't it?" "Everything makes it worse. Cold, heat, movement, stillness. It's just something I live with." "Let me help." "Maeve, you're freezing yourself. Let me help," she repeated more firmly. "Please." There was something in her voice, a need that had nothing to do with healing and everything to do with purpose. She needed to do this, needed to use her gift, needed to be something other than the woman men called witch. Caleb understood that need, had felt it himself every time he'd done something useful after the war, every time he'd proven he was more than just a broken soldier. "All right," he said. She moved closer, kneeling in front of him, placing her hands on either side of his leg through the wet fabric of his pants. Her touch was still warm, impossibly warm, like she carried her own fire inside her. Caleb felt the now familiar sensation of loosening, of pain receding like a tide going out. But this time was different. Maybe it was the cold, or the intimacy of the situation, or the way emotions were running high in the aftermath of nearly dying. But as Maeve worked, Caleb felt something more than physical relief. He felt seen, known, accepted, scars and all. "Where did you learn this?" he asked quietly. "This thing you do that's more than just herbs and medicine." Maeve's hands paused, then continued their work. "My grandmother called it the knowing. Some healers have it, some don't. It's like, imagine you could hear the body talking, telling you where it hurts, what it needs. That's what I feel. Whispers under skin. Heat where there should be cold. Cold where there should be warmth. My hands listen, and then they answer. And people called you witch for it. People fear what they can't understand. They'd rather burn the healer than admit there are things beyond their comprehension." Her voice carried old pain, old fear. "I've been careful most of my life, used it quietly, helped people in ways they could explain as normal medicine. But when Robbie Whelan died, his mother was looking for someone to blame, and I was convenient. The Irish immigrant with strange skills. The woman who spoke to dead grandmothers and mixed potions. Easy to call witch, easy to want dead. Caleb put his hand over hers, stopping her work. "You're not going to die," he said fiercely. "Not for helping people. Not for having a gift. I won't let that happen." Maeve looked up at him, her face inches from his, firelight and shadow playing across her features. "You can't promise that. The world is what it is." "Then I'll make it different, or die trying." The words hung between them, too large and too honest. Caleb hadn't meant to say them, hadn't meant to reveal how much he'd already come to care about this woman he barely knew. But there they were, spoken and real, changing the shape of everything. "Why?" Maeve whispered. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Caleb thought about lying, about offering some easy answer that would smooth over the moment. But he'd spent 13 years lying to himself, and he was tired of it, tired of pretending he didn't feel things, didn't need things, didn't want things. "Because when I look at you," he said slowly, "I see someone fighting to stay whole in a world that wants to break her, and I know what that fight costs. I've been fighting it myself for 13 years, and maybe—" He paused, gathering courage. "Maybe I'm tired of fighting alone." Maeve's eyes glistened, tears mixing with rain on her face. "I feel safer with you than I should," she said, "than I have any right to feel. I barely know you, but when you cut those ropes in Red Hollow, something in me recognized something in you, like calling to like, broken calling to broken." "Maybe we're not broken," Caleb said. "Maybe we're just wounded, and wounds can heal given time and care." "Is that what we're doing? Healing each other?" "Maybe, if you're willing." For answer, Maeve leaned forward and rested her forehead against his, a gesture so intimate it made Caleb's breath catch. They stayed that way for a long moment, breathing each other's air, sharing warmth and something more precious than warmth. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside their small shelter, something new was being born, something fragile and fierce that neither of them had names for yet, but both recognized as essential, as necessary, as maybe the only thing standing between them and the darkness that had been chasing them both for too long. The night deepened, the fire burned low, they fed it carefully, hoarding their small pile of wood, and when that was gone, they huddled together for warmth, wrapped in their damp coats, and the shared heat of two bodies that had decided, consciously or not, that survival meant staying close. Caleb dozed fitfully, waking every time Maeve shivered or the horses shifted. His bad leg throbbed despite her ministrations, but the pain felt distant, less important than the weight of Maeve's head on his shoulder, the trust implicit in how deeply she'd fallen asleep against him. He thought about the road ahead. 4 more days to Sweet Creek, if the weather cleared and the trails were passable. 4 more days of riding beside this woman who'd somehow become essential to him in less than a week. Then what? He'd introduce her to Michael and Sarah, help her get settled, give her the fresh start he'd promised. And then? The question scared him more than he wanted to admit. He'd gotten used to being alone, had built a life around solitude. The thought of caring about someone, of being responsible for another person's happiness and safety, felt like standing on the edge of a cliff in the dark. Terrifying. Inevitable. Maeve stirred against him, murmuring something in Irish, a dream language he couldn't understand. He tightened his arm around her, a gesture of protection that felt both natural and completely foreign. "I've got you," he whispered into her hair. "You're safe." And maybe it was a promise he couldn't keep. Maybe the world would take her away like it had taken everything else. But for this night, in this moment, with rain drumming overhead and floodwaters roaring below, Caleb Rourke made himself a vow. He would keep Maeve Callahan safe. He would help her build a life where her gifts were honored instead of feared. And if that meant planting roots for the first time since the war, if that meant risking his carefully guarded heart, then so be it. Some things were worth the risk. Some people were worth fighting for. He thought maybe Maeve Callahan was both. Dawn came slow and gray. The storm finally spent, leaving the world washed clean and dripping. Caleb woke to find himself still sitting against the stone wall, his body stiff and aching, Maeve asleep in his arms. Her face was peaceful in sleep, younger somehow, the lines of worry and fear smoothed away. He didn't want to wake her, didn't want to break this moment of quiet intimacy, but the horses needed attention, and the day wouldn't wait. "Maeve," he said softly. Sun's up. We should move. She came awake instantly, the wariness of someone who'd learned not to trust sleep's vulnerability. For a second, she looked confused, disoriented by waking in a man's arms. Then memory returned and something softened in her expression. We survived, she said. We survived, he agreed. They stood, joints creaking, and assessed the damage. The flood had receded, leaving the draw below scoured clean and littered with debris. The trail would be muddy but passable. Their supplies were mostly intact, protected by oilcloth and luck. They were bruised, exhausted, but alive. How's your leg? Maeve asked as they saddled the horses. Stiff, but better than it has any right to be, thanks to you. I'll work on it again tonight, if we find decent shelter. You don't have to. I want to. She met his eyes with that direct gaze that always made him feel transparent. I want to help you, Caleb. Let me. So he nodded, accepting what she offered, and they mounted up and rode out into the clean-washed morning. The mountains ahead looked closer now, more real, painted in shades of green and gray under clearing skies. Sweet Creek was up there somewhere, waiting. A new life was up there, a chance to be something other than what they'd been. They rode in comfortable silence, but it was different from the careful quiet of those first days. Now it felt like companionship, like understanding. They'd spent a night pressed together for survival and woken changed, bound by something neither could name but both could feel. Around mid-morning, they stopped to water the horses at a stream that ran clear and cold over smooth stones. Maeve knelt to fill their canteens, and Caleb found himself watching her, memorizing the line of her neck, the way sunlight caught in her dark red hair. When had she become beautiful to him? Or had she always been, and he'd just been too closed off to notice? You're staring, Maeve said without looking up, but he could hear the smile in her voice. Sorry, just thinking. About? About how different things looked than they did a week ago. About how buying a woman at an auction seemed like the worst idea I'd ever had, and now it seems like maybe the best. Maeve stood, turning to face him. We're going to be all right, aren't we? You and me? It was a question and a hope and a fear all wrapped together. Caleb crossed to her, took the canteens from her hands, set them aside. Then he did something he'd been wanting to do since that night in the cave, maybe longer. He reached out and touched her face, gentle as prayer, his calloused fingers tracing the line of her cheekbone. Yeah, he said. I think we're going to be all right. Maeve leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for a moment. I haven't felt safe in so long, Caleb. Not since my grandmother sent me away, not for 18 years, but with you, I do. And it terrifies me. Why? Because safe things can be taken away. Because the world has a habit of destroying anything good and gentle. Because I don't trust happiness. It's always been a lie. Caleb understood that fear, had lived with it himself for years. Maybe this time it's not a lie, he said. Maybe this time we get to keep it. Do you really believe that? He thought about it, standing there in the morning sun with this brave, wounded woman looking at him like he might have answers he didn't possess. Did he believe it? Could he? I'm willing to try, he said finally. If you are. Maeve opened her eyes, and they were bright with unshed tears and something that might have been hope. I'm willing, she whispered. They mounted up and rode on, the Rattlesnake Range growing larger with every mile, Sweet Creek waiting somewhere beyond the next ridge. Behind them, Red Hollow and the auction block faded into memory. Ahead, the future waited, uncertain but possible. And for the first time in longer than either could remember, possible felt like enough. Sweet Creek revealed itself gradually, the way promises sometimes do, unfolding piece by piece until suddenly the whole picture comes clear. They crested a pine-covered ridge late on the 7th day, and there it was below them. A valley green as hope, split down the middle by a creek that caught the afternoon sun and threw it back like liquid silver. Scattered homesteads dotted the landscape, smoke rising from chimneys, fields carved out of wilderness with stubborn optimism. At the valley's heart sat a town, small but real, buildings that looked like they meant to stay. That's it, Caleb said, and heard the catch in his own voice. That's Sweet Creek. Maeve sat her horse beside him, taking it in with eyes that had seen too many broken promises to trust easily. But even she couldn't hide the flicker of something that might have been hope crossing her face. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "It looks like a place people could be happy. Michael's ranch is on the far side, about 3 miles out. We could push through, get there before dark." But Maeve shook her head, still studying the valley. "Let's stop in town first. Get cleaned up. Maybe find me something decent to wear. I don't want to meet your family looking like something the trail dragged in." Caleb looked at her, dusty, trail-worn, her hair escaping from the braid she'd woven that morning, and thought she'd never looked more beautiful. But he understood what she was really saying. She wanted time to prepare, to gather herself before facing the judgment of new people, wanted to arrive on her own terms, with whatever dignity she could muster. "All right," he agreed. "Town it is." They rode down into Sweet Creek as the afternoon stretched long and golden, the kind of light that made everything look softer than it was. The main street was wider than Red Hollow's, lined with buildings that showed the marks of care. Fresh paint, straight walls, windows that actually had glass. A general store, a blacksmith, a hotel called the Silver Pine that looked almost respectable. A church with a white steeple. A schoolhouse. Signs of civilization taking root and meaning it. People noticed them as they rode in, the way people in small towns always notice strangers. But the looks they got weren't hostile, just curious. A few men nodded greeting. A woman sweeping her porch smiled. It was so different from Red Hollow that Caleb felt something in his chest unclench, tension he hadn't known he was carrying finally letting go. They stopped at the Silver Pine, where a cheerful woman named Mrs. Brennan showed them to separate rooms without a hint of the suspicion that had followed them elsewhere. While Maeve bathed and rested, Caleb made his way to the general store, where he asked about his brother. "Michael Rourke?" The proprietor, a heavy-set man with friendly eyes, grinned. "Sure, everyone knows Michael. Good man, works hard, treats people fair. His place is one of the best in the valley. He and Sarah have done well for themselves." "You family?" "His brother just arrived." "Well, he'll be glad to see you. He's mentioned having a brother back east. You planning to stay?" The question caught Caleb off guard. Was he? A week ago, he would have said he was just passing through, that staying anywhere was impossible for someone like him. But now, with Maeve upstairs cleaning 7 days of trail dust off her skin, with this valley spreading out around him like an invitation, the answer felt different. "Maybe," he said. "We'll see." He bought supplies they didn't really need, just to be polite, and headed back to the hotel. In the small dining room, he found Maeve waiting, and the sight of her stopped him in his tracks. She'd changed into one of the dresses he'd bought her in Red Hollow, a simple dark blue cotton that somehow made her eyes even greener. Her hair was clean and braided, coiled at the nape of her neck in a style that looked both practical and elegant. She'd scrubbed the trail dirt away, and without it he could see her clearly, young, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with softness and everything to do with strength. "You're staring again," she said, but she was smiling. "Can't help it. You clean up nice." "So do you." He'd shaved, washed, put on his one good shirt. It wasn't much, but it was better than the trail-worn man who'd ridden into Red Hollow a week ago. They looked almost respectable, almost like people who belonged somewhere. Mrs. Brennan served them dinner, pot roast, fresh bread, vegetables that hadn't come from a can. Real food, the kind that reminded you what civilization was supposed to taste like. They ate slowly, savoring it, neither one eager to rush toward whatever came next. "Are you nervous?" Maeve asked, pushing carrots around her plate. "About seeing your brother?" "Some. It's been 5 years since Michael left Ohio. We've exchanged letters, but it's not the same as seeing someone. People change. And you're different than you were. The war changed you." "The war changed everyone." Caleb set down his fork, appetite fading. "Michael saw action too, but not like I did. He was quartermaster, spent most of the war managing supplies, keeping records. He saw men die, but he didn't—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "He didn't have to kill anyone. Didn't have to make the choices that stick in your head and won't let go." Maeve reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "He'll still love you. Family doesn't stop loving you because you're wounded." "Some family does. Not all family, not the ones worth keeping." Caleb hoped she was right, Hoped that Michael would see past the limp and the scars and the silences to the brother he'd once been. Hoped that Sarah would welcome them instead of seeing them as burdens or complications. Hoped that Sweet Creek could be what it looked like, a place to stop running. They finished dinner and stepped outside into the evening, where the valley was settling into that peaceful hour between day and night. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke and possibility. Down the street, someone was playing a fiddle, and the sound carried sweet and lonesome across the distance. "There's a social tomorrow night," Mrs. Brennan had told them over dessert. "At the Grange Hall, music, dancing, food, the whole valley turns out. You two should come. Good way to meet folks." Caleb had nodded non-committally, but now, standing in the soft evening air with Maeve beside him, the idea didn't seem terrible. Maybe it would be good to meet the community before showing up at Michael's door. Maybe it would give Maeve a chance to see what Sweet Creek really was, beyond first impressions. "Want to walk?" he asked. "See the town before dark?" "Yes," Maeve said. "I'd like that." They wandered slowly, passing houses where families were finishing their evening meals, where children played in yards that looked safe enough to play in. Sweet Creek felt solid in a way many frontier towns didn't, like it had roots that went deep enough to hold. At the edge of town, they found the creek itself, running clear and cold over smooth stones, lined with cottonwoods that whispered in the evening breeze. Maeve knelt at the water's edge, trailing her fingers through it. "It's beautiful here," she said. "Clean. Like maybe a person could start over, leave behind everything that came before. Is that what you want, to forget?" "Not forget, but maybe—" She paused, watching water flow over her hand. "Maybe learn to remember without drowning in it. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." Caleb lowered himself to sit beside her, stretching out his bad leg. "I've spent 13 years trying to outrun my memories. Maybe it's time to stop running and figure out how to live with them instead. We could help each other with that, if you wanted." The offer hung between them, layered with meaning they were both still learning to name: partnership, companionship. Maybe something more, given time and courage. Caleb thought about the night in the cave, about waking with Maeve in his arms, about how right it had felt despite every reason it shouldn't. "I'd like that," he said. "Very much." Maeve smiled, the real smile that transformed her face from merely pretty to luminous. "Then let's make a pact. We'll help each other heal, we'll be honest about what hurts, and we'll build something here in Sweet Creek that's ours, that nobody can take away. Deal." Caleb held out his hand, formal and serious. Maeve took it, her grip strong and sure, and they shook on it like business partners making a contract. But the touch lingered longer than business required, fingers intertwining, connection deepening into something that made Caleb's heart beat faster. They sat by the creek until full dark, talking and not talking, comfortable in silences that felt chosen rather than empty. By the time they made their way back to the Silver Pine, Caleb's leg was aching fiercely, but his soul felt lighter than it had in years. At the door to her room, Maeve paused. "Thank you," she said, "for bringing me here, for giving me a chance I didn't think I'd get. Thank you for coming, for trusting me when you had no reason to." She rose on her toes and kissed his cheek, quick and soft. "Good night, Caleb." "Good night." He stood in the hallway long after her door closed, touching the place her lips had brushed, feeling like a boy with his first crush instead of a 38-year-old man who'd seen too much of the world's darkness. But maybe that was healing too, remembering how to feel things simply, without the weight of war and loss crushing every tender emotion. The next day they spent exploring Sweet Creek, meeting people, getting the lay of the land. The town physician, Dr. Reynolds, was an older man with kind eyes who welcomed Maeve's interest in healing with genuine enthusiasm rather than suspicion. The schoolteacher, Miss Peterson, invited Maeve to visit her classroom any time. The blacksmith, the baker, the minister, all of them friendly, all of them curious about the newcomers but not prying. By afternoon, Caleb felt certain. Sweet Creek was different. Maybe it was the isolation that made people more accepting, or maybe it was just the particular mixture of souls who'd settled here. But there was an openness, a willingness to let people be who they were that felt rare and precious. I like it here, Maeve said as they walked back toward the hotel to prepare for the evening social. I like these people. They feel real. Yeah, Caleb agreed. They do. The Grange Hall was lit up like a celebration when they arrived just after sundown, lanterns strung from the rafters, windows glowing warm and welcoming. Music spilled out into the night, fiddle and guitar, and someone's surprisingly good voice singing a ballad about lost love and found hope. Inside, the hall was packed with what looked like half the valley, people dressed in their best, talking and laughing with the ease of a community that genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Caleb felt Maeve tense beside him as they entered, that old wariness returning. He understood it. Crowds meant exposure, meant people asking questions, meant the possibility of recognition and accusation. But he also believed Sweet Creek was different. He had to believe it. Stay close to me, he murmured, and remember, you don't owe anyone your story. Just be yourself. That's more than enough. They made their way through the crowd, Caleb fielding introductions, shaking hands, deflecting personal questions with the practiced ease of someone who'd been doing it for years. People were curious about them, obviously, but not invasive, and more than one person mentioned Michael and Sarah with genuine affection, which settled Caleb's nerves a bit. They were standing near the refreshment table, Maeve sipping punch that was probably spiked but pretending not to notice, when the commotion started. It began as a disturbance near the door, voices raised in alarm rather than anger. The music faltered and stopped. People turned, conversations dying, that particular hush falling that meant something serious was happening. "Someone get Doc Reynolds," a man shouted. "The Morrison boy. He fell from the hayloft." The crowd parted, and Caleb saw them carrying a child through the door. A boy maybe 8 or 9 years old, limp and unconscious, his mother following behind with a face gone gray with terror. They laid him on one of the long tables, people clustering around, everyone talking at once, advice and prayers mixing into useless noise. "Where's the doctor?" someone demanded. "He went to the Jensen place. Their baby's got the croup. Won't be back for hours." "The boy needs help now." Caleb felt Maeve go rigid beside him, her whole body focused on the child like a hunting dog on point. He knew that look, had seen it before. The healer in her was responding, recognizing need, unable to walk away. "Don't," he said quietly, putting a hand on her arm. "Maeve, you don't have to—" But she was already moving, pushing through the crowd with determination that cleared a path. People fell back, surprised, as this strange woman they barely knew stepped up to the table where the Morrison boy lay too still, his breathing shallow and ragged. "I'm a healer," Maeve said clearly, her voice carrying authority that silenced the confused protests. "Let me examine him." Mrs. Morrison looked up, desperate and drowning. "Please," she whispered, "please help him." Maeve placed her hands on the boy's head, then his neck, then his chest, her fingers moving with purposeful care. Caleb watched her face shift into that focused intensity he'd seen before, the look of someone listening to things others couldn't hear. "His name?" she asked. "Thomas. Tommy. Tommy, can you hear me?" No response. Maeve's hands continued their examination, finding a massive swelling on the back of his head, a wrong angle to his left arm. "He hit his head hard. There's swelling, but I don't think the skull is fractured. The arm is broken. I can feel where the bone snapped clean. He's unconscious from the impact, but his breathing is steady. He's strong." "Will he live?" Mrs. Morrison's voice broke on the question. "Yes," Maeve said with absolute certainty, "if I can treat him now. But I need quiet. I need clean water and cloth. I need someone to hold a lamp steady. And I need you all to trust me." For a moment, nobody moved. Caleb saw the hesitation, the doubt, saw people exchanging glances that said they didn't know this woman, didn't know if she could be trusted with a child's life, saw the moment hovering on a knife's edge between faith and fear. Then Mrs. Morrison spoke. "Help him. Whatever you need, we'll get it. Just help my boy." And that was enough. People sprang into action, bringing water, cloth, lamps. The crowd pressed closer, watching as Maeve worked with swift, confident movements that spoke of training and talent both. "The arm first," she said. "Tommy, I'm sorry, but this will hurt. Someone hold him steady." 2 men pinned the boy's shoulders. Maeve felt along the break with delicate precision, her face concentrating. Then, in one smooth motion, she pulled and twisted, setting the bone with an audible click that made half the crowd wince. Tommy cried out but didn't wake, which Maeve said was actually good. His body was protecting him from pain he wasn't ready to feel. She splinted the arm with practiced efficiency, binding it with strips of cloth someone provided. Then she turned her attention to his head, her hands hovering over the swelling, barely touching but clearly feeling something the rest of them couldn't perceive. "There's pressure building," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "Blood pooling beneath the bone. Not enough to kill him, but enough to keep him under. I need to help it drain, help his body clear it." She placed both hands flat against Tommy's head, closing her eyes. The room went utterly silent, everyone holding their breath. Caleb watched Maeve's face, saw the intense focus, saw sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool evening, saw her lips moving in what might have been prayer or might have been the words her grandmother had taught her decades ago in a green Irish cottage. Beneath her hands, something changed. Caleb couldn't have said what exactly, but he felt it. A shift in the air, a presence like heat without temperature. Maeve's breathing deepened, her whole body trembling with effort. The lamplight seemed to brighten around her, though that might have been his imagination. And then Tommy gasped, a deep shuddering breath, and his eyes fluttered open. "Mama?" he whispered, confused and hurting but undeniably alive, undeniably conscious. Mrs. Morrison sobbed, reaching for her son. Maeve swayed, catching herself on the table's edge, her face pale with exhaustion. Around them the crowd erupted, some people cheering, some crossing themselves, some just standing there in shock at what they'd witnessed. Caleb pushed through to Maeve's side, steadying her. "You all right?" "Tired," she admitted. "That took more than I expected. But he'll be fine. The swelling will go down over the next few days. Keep him quiet, watch for fever or confusion, but he'll heal clean." "You saved him." Mrs. Morrison looked at Maeve with tears streaming down her face. "You saved my boy. I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks needed. I only did what needed doing." But the gratitude wouldn't be denied. People pressed forward, wanting to touch Maeve, to thank her, to ask questions about her gift. Caleb saw the panic starting to rise in her eyes, saw her being overwhelmed by attention that might too easily turn to scrutiny. "She needs rest," he said firmly, inserting himself between Maeve and the crowd. "She's exhausted from the healing. Please, give her space." A man stepped forward, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that looked achingly familiar despite 5 years and whatever changes time had carved. Michael. Caleb recognized his brother instantly, felt emotion surge up from somewhere deep and unexpected. "I'm Michael Rourke," his brother said, addressing Maeve with respect. "I don't know who you are or where you came from, but you just saved Tommy Morrison's life, and that makes you a hero in Sweet Creek. Whatever you need, whatever we can do for you, you just name it." Then Michael turned, and his eyes met Caleb's, and recognition crashed between them like a wave. "Caleb?" Michael breathed. "My God, is that really you?" "Hello, little brother." Michael crossed the space between them in 2 strides and pulled Caleb into a fierce embrace that spoke of years missed, letters that couldn't convey everything, worry and love and relief all tangled together. Caleb felt his throat close, felt tears he hadn't known he was capable of, any more threatening to spill over. "You're here," Michael said, pulling back to look at him properly. "You're really here. When did you arrive? Why didn't you come straight to the ranch?" And he noticed Maeve standing quiet and exhausted beside them. "And who is this remarkable woman?" "This is Maeve Callahan," Caleb said, pride evident in his voice. "The finest healer you'll ever meet, and—" He paused, realizing he wasn't sure how to finish that sentence. Friend felt inadequate. Traveling companion felt wrong. Something more felt presumptuous. "And the woman he's in love with," Maeve finished quietly, surprising them both. She met Caleb's shocked look with a small smile. "I may be tired, but I'm not blind, and neither are you." The words hung there, naked and honest, changing everything. Around them, the social was resuming, people returning to music and conversation now that the crisis had passed. But in their small circle, time seemed to have stopped, waiting for Caleb to respond to what Maeve had just named. He could have denied it, could have laughed it off as exhaustion talking, as misunderstanding, could have maintained the careful distance he'd spent 13 years perfecting. Instead, he took Maeve's hand, lacing his fingers through hers, and told the truth. "Yeah," he said, looking at his brother but speaking to Maeve. "I am." Michael's face split into a grin that took years off him. "Well then," he said, "looks like you brought home more than you expected. Come on, both of you. Sarah's here somewhere, and she's going to want to meet the woman who saved Tommy and captured my brother's heart in the same night." They followed Michael through the crowd, Maeve's hand still in Caleb's, both of them a little stunned by what had just been spoken aloud. Sarah Rourke turned out to be a warm-eyed woman with capable hands and a laugh that came easy, and she welcomed Maeve with genuine affection that felt like grace. "You'll stay with us, of course," Sarah insisted, "both of you, for as long as you like. We've got room, and—" She looked at her husband, something passing between them. "Michael's been hoping you'd come home, Caleb. This is where you belong, with family." Home. The word felt foreign and perfect all at once. Caleb looked around the Grange Hall at this community that had witnessed Maeve's gift and called it miracle instead of witchcraft. Looked at his brother, older but still recognizably Michael, solid and steady and real. Looked at Maeve, exhausted and beautiful, and holding his hand like she didn't plan to let go. Maybe this was what healing looked like. Not forgetting the wounds, but learning to live with them. Not running from pain, but finding people who'd help you carry it. Not being alone, but being known and loved anyway. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We'd like that." The social continued around them, music and laughter, life being lived and celebrated. Tommy Morrison was sitting up now drinking water, his color returning, his mother hovering close with prayers of gratitude still on her lips. Someone started a dance, couples swirling across the floor in patterns older than memory. Michael tugged Sarah into the dance, leaving Caleb and Maeve standing together at the edge of the celebration. She leaned against him, tired enough that he could feel her trembling. "That was remarkable what you did," he said quietly. "Brave and remarkable and everything they needed." "I was terrified," Maeve admitted. "The whole time I kept thinking they'd turn on me. Call me witch, drive me out. But they didn't, they just let me help. Because you showed them who you really are. Not what scared people said you were, but who you are. A healer. Someone who saves lives." "We saved him together," Maeve said. "You gave me the courage to step forward. Without you, I would have hidden in the crowd, afraid to be seen." "Then I guess we're even. You've been healing me since Red Hollow. Fair's fair." She laughed softly, the sound lost in the music. "Is it true what I said? That you love me?" The question deserved honesty, deserved courage to match what Maeve had shown in front of the whole town. Caleb turned to face her, taking both her hands in his, looking into those fierce green eyes that had first captured him on an auction block a week and a lifetime ago. "Yes," he said simply. "I know it's fast. I know we barely know each other. But yeah, Maeve Callahan, I love you. Love your strength and your gift and your courage. Love the way you see the world. Love who I am when I'm with you. Someone better than I thought I could be." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "I love you too. Have since you cut those ropes. Maybe before. I don't know when it started, but I know it's real." He kissed her then, there in the Grange Hall with half of Sweet Creek watching, a gentle kiss that tasted of salt and hope, and promises neither of them quite knew how to keep yet, but were willing to try. Around them, someone cheered and someone else laughed, and the music played on. When they pulled apart, Maeve was blushing, and Caleb felt lighter than he had since before the war. They stood together, watching the dance, and for the first time in 13 years, Caleb thought maybe, just maybe, he'd finally found his way home. The Rourke Ranch sprawled across 200 acres of prime valley land, bordered on one side by Sweet Creek itself, and on the other by foothills that rose toward mountains still capped with last winter's snow. Michael and Sarah had built well, a sturdy 2-story house with a wide porch, a barn that looked like it could weather anything, corrals and outbuildings arranged with the kind of thoughtfulness that spoke of permanence. This wasn't a stopover. This was a life built to last. Caleb felt something twist in his chest as they rode up the long approach at midday, sunlight turning everything golden and possible. He'd spent 13 years avoiding exactly this, the settling, the staying, The risk of caring about a place enough that losing it would hurt. But watching Michael point out improvements he'd made, hearing the pride in his brother's voice, seeing Sarah's garden thriving despite the harsh Wyoming climate, Caleb felt the old resistance crumbling. Maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe, with Maeve beside him and family willing to take them both in, it was finally time to try putting down roots. That ridge there, Michael was saying, gesturing toward the eastern boundary, that's where I'm thinking of building you a house, Caleb. If you're planning to stay, that is. Good view, close enough to help with the ranch work, but far enough to give you privacy. Land's yours if you want it. Caleb looked at the ridge, imagining a house there, imagining mornings waking to that view, imagining Maeve in a kitchen with windows facing the mountains, imagining a life that looked like peace instead of endless motion. I want it, he said, surprising himself with how certain he sounded. Thank you, Michael. His brother grinned, clapping him on the shoulder. Good. It's about damn time you stopped wandering and came home. Home. There was that word again, settling into Caleb's bones like it belonged there. They spent the afternoon settling in, Sarah showing Maeve to a sunny room on the second floor, Michael walking Caleb through the ranch operations. It was good land, well managed, with cattle that looked healthy and horses that were better than average. Michael had done more than survive out here. He'd thrived, built something substantial from raw territory and determination. You've done well, Caleb said as they stood in the barn, breathing in the familiar smell of hay and horse and leather. Better than I thought possible. It wasn't easy. First winter nearly killed us, lost half the herd, damn near lost Sarah to pneumonia. But we held on, learned the land, learned what works here. Michael paused, studying his brother's face. I'm glad you came, Caleb. I've worried about you, all those years of drifting. The war did something to you that the rest of us didn't quite understand. The war did something to everyone. Yeah, but not everyone spent 13 years running from it afterward. Michael's voice was gentle, not accusing. I'm not judging. I want you to know you're safe here. Whatever demons you're carrying, whatever you've done or seen, you're still my brother. You're still family. Caleb felt his throat tighten, emotion he'd spent years suppressing threatening to break through. Thank you, he managed. That means more than you know. And Maeve, Michael continued, she's remarkable. What she did for Tommy Morrison last night, people are already calling it a miracle. Sweet Creek's never had a real healer before, just Doc Reynolds, and he's getting old. Can't always make it to emergencies. If she's willing, this valley needs her. She's willing. She just needs to feel safe enough to use her gift without fear. She'll be safe here, Michael promised. I'll make sure of it. That evening, Sarah cooked a feast, roast chicken, fresh bread, vegetables from her garden, pie made with wild berries Sarah had preserved from last summer. They ate at a table that felt like family, conversation flowing easy and warm. Sarah asked Maeve about healing, genuinely curious rather than suspicious. And Maeve opened up in ways Caleb hadn't heard before, talking about her grandmother's teachings, about the knowing that lived in her hands. I've always been able to feel it, Maeve said, her hands gesturing as she spoke. Even as a child. My grandmother said I was born with the gift, that it runs in our family back generations. She taught me the herbs and the techniques, but the feeling that was always just there, like having an extra sense that others don't possess. And you can truly feel what's wrong? Sarah leaned forward, fascinated. Inside someone's body? It's hard to explain. It's like, Maeve paused, searching for words. Like listening to a song and hearing where a note is off key. The body has its own music, its own rhythm. When something's wrong, I can hear the discord. My hands know how to help harmonize it again. That's beautiful, Sarah said. And nothing like witchcraft, no matter what ignorant people claimed. Maeve's eyes welled up. You don't know how much it means to hear someone say that, to not be feared for what I am. What you are is a healer, Sarah said firmly. A blessing, not a curse. And Sweet Creek is lucky to have you. After dinner, while Sarah and Maeve washed dishes and talked like old friends, Michael pulled Caleb out to the porch, where stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. You love her, Michael said. It wasn't a question. I do. I know it's fast, I know it seems crazy, but it doesn't seem crazy at all. I fell in love with Sarah in 3 days. When you know, you know. Michael lit his pipe, the tobacco smell mixing with pine and evening air. You planning to marry her? The question stopped Caleb cold. Marriage. The idea felt enormous, terrifying, absolutely right. I want to, but there's complications. She's been through hell, Michael. Accused of murder, sold into indenture, treated like property. I don't want her to think I'm trying to own her, to control her. She needs time to be free, to find herself again. Have you asked her what she needs? Not in so many words. Maybe you should. Michael puffed his pipe, thoughtful. In my experience, women appreciate being included in decisions about their own lives. Radical concept, I know. Caleb laughed despite himself. When did you get so wise? Sarah beats it into me daily. Michael grinned, then sobered. Seriously, though, talk to her. Don't make assumptions about what she can or can't handle. She saved a boy's life in front of half the valley. She's stronger than you're giving her credit for. They stood in comfortable silence, brothers side by side under Wyoming stars, and Caleb felt something he hadn't felt in years. Contentment. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of something strong enough to balance it. Family. Belonging. Love. Inside, he could hear Maeve laughing at something Sarah said, the sound carrying through open windows like music. His heart pulled toward that sound, toward her, with an intensity that would have frightened him a week ago, but now just felt inevitable. The next morning, Caleb woke early, his internal clock still set to trail hours. He found Maeve already up, sitting on the porch steps with a cup of coffee, watching the sun paint the mountains pink and gold. Couldn't sleep? He asked, settling beside her. Slept better than I have in years. Just wanted to see the sunrise from this porch. Wanted to know if it felt as good as I thought it would. And does it? Better. She turned to look at him, her hair loose around her shoulders, catching morning light. I keep waiting for something to go wrong, Caleb, for someone to recognize me, to remember the accusations, for this to turn out to be too good to be true. What if it's just true? What if Sweet Creek really is the fresh start we both need? Can I tell you something? Maeve set down her coffee, her voice going quiet. When I was on that auction block in Red Hollow, I'd given up, completely. I thought my life was over, that I'd be sold to someone who'd use me up and throw me away. I was just waiting for it to be over. Maeve, let me finish. She took a shaky breath. Then you stepped forward. You bid on me when no one else would. You cut those ropes and set me free, and I didn't understand why. Didn't trust it. But every day since then, you've shown me that some people are genuinely good, that I deserve kindness, that my gift isn't a curse. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she was smiling. You gave me back my life, Caleb Rourke, and then you gave me something more. You gave me a future worth living. So thank you for everything. Caleb pulled her close, holding her while she cried against his shoulder, her tears soaking through his shirt. You gave me my life back too, he said into her hair. I was just existing before you, going through motions. Now I'm actually living. They sat like that until the sun cleared the mountains, wrapped in each other, and the quiet morning, two people who'd found each other against all odds and decided to hold on. Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm that felt like it had always existed. Caleb worked the ranch with Michael, learning the land, reacquainting his body with the hard physical labor that actually felt good after years of aimless drifting. His leg ached, especially at first, but Maeve worked on it every evening, her hands easing the pain, and gradually it got stronger. Not healed, but better. Manageable. Maeve, meanwhile, became indispensable to Sweet Creek. Word of Tommy Morrison's healing spread, and people started coming to the ranch asking for help. A rancher with a badly set broken wrist from years ago that still pained him. A woman with headaches so severe she couldn't function. A child with a fever. An old man with joints so swollen he could barely walk. Maeve treated them all, charging nothing but accepting whatever people offered. Eggs, vegetables, a side of bacon, firewood. She never turned anyone away, never made them feel foolish for seeking help. And slowly, steadily, Sweet Creek learned to trust her completely. Dr. Reynolds visited one afternoon, ostensibly to check on Tommy Morrison, but really to meet the healer everyone was talking about. Caleb watched nervously as the old doctor examined Maeve's work, expecting professional jealousy or skepticism. Instead, Reynolds just nodded approvingly. Excellent technique, clean splint work, proper care of the head injury, and the boy's healing remarkably well. He turned to Maeve with genuine respect. You've got real skill, young lady. Training? My grandmother, back in Ireland, and years of practice. Well, your grandmother taught you well. Tell me, would you be interested in working together? I'm getting old, can't always make it to outlying homesteads. If you were willing to take some cases, with me providing backup and consultation, we could serve this valley twice as well. Maeve's face lit up. I'd be honored. They spent an hour discussing cases, comparing techniques, Reynolds clearly impressed by Maeve's knowledge despite her unconventional training. When he left, he shook her hand like a colleague rather than a curiosity. You've arrived, my dear, he said. Welcome to Sweet Creek's medical community, all two of us. After he'd gone, Maeve turned to Caleb with tears in her eyes. He treated me like an equal, like my gift was valuable instead of dangerous. Because it is valuable, and people here see that. Word came that Tommy Morrison was fully recovered, running around like the accident had never happened. His parents came to the ranch bearing gifts and gratitude, Mrs. Morrison hugging Maeve fiercely enough to take her breath away. You saved my son, she said. I'll never forget that. None of us will. It was October now, the air turning crisp, aspens on the hillsides going gold. Michael helped Caleb stake out the foundation for a house on that eastern ridge, and they spent weekends hauling timber, making plans, building something permanent. It was hard work, satisfying in ways Caleb had forgotten work could be. Creating instead of just surviving, building instead of running. One evening, as they stood looking at the house taking shape, just framing so far, but you could see what it would become, Michael asked the question Caleb had been both anticipating and dreading. When are you going to ask her? Ask who what? Don't play stupid. When are you going to ask Maeve to marry you? Caleb drove another nail, buying time. I've been thinking about it. For 6 weeks. At some point, thinking becomes stalling. What if she says no? What if she needs more time to be free, to not belong to anyone? Then she says no, and you respect that and ask again later. But Caleb, Michael put down his hammer, serious now. That woman looks at you like you hung the moon. She loves you, and unless I'm completely blind, you're building this house for her as much as for yourself. It was true. Every decision Caleb made about the house, he thought about Maeve. Windows positioned to catch morning light because she loved mornings. A kitchen large enough for her to prepare medicines and remedies. A room that could be a clinic if she wanted. He was building a home for both of them, even if he hadn't said it out loud yet. I don't have a ring, he said finally. So make one. You're good with your hands. Carve something, forge something. It doesn't have to be fancy, it just has to come from you. That night, while Maeve was helping Sarah with evening chores, Caleb sat at the workbench in the barn and began to shape a ring. He chose applewood, smooth-grained and warm-toned, and worked it slowly with knife and sandpaper until it was perfect. Small enough to fit Maeve's finger, but strong enough to last. Simple, but beautiful, like her. It took him 2 weeks, working in stolen moments when Maeve wouldn't notice his absence. He carved a pattern of delicate leaves around the band, remembering how she'd talked about her grandmother's garden in Ireland, about plants that healed. He polished it until it glowed, smooth as silk, perfect as he could make it. He carried it in his pocket for 3 days, waiting for the right moment. The house was nearly finished now. Roof on, walls up, windows installed. It still needed doors and interior work, but it looked like a home, like a promise kept. On a Sunday afternoon in late October, with the valley painted in autumn colors and the air carrying the first hint of coming winter, Caleb asked Maeve to ride with him. They took horses up into the foothills, following game trails through aspens that shimmered gold in the slanting light. He led her to a place he'd found weeks ago, a clearing on a ridge that overlooked the entire valley. You could see Sweet Creek from here, see the ranch, see the house he'd built, see everything they'd found together laid out below like a map of their future. It's beautiful, Maeve breathed, taking it in. Yeah, it is. But Caleb was looking at her, not the view. Maeve, I need to ask you something. She turned to face him, something in his tone catching her attention. All right. He dismounted, then helped her down, his hands lingering at her waist. His heart was hammering, and his carefully prepared words had fled completely. So he just started talking, letting truth guide him. When I saw you on that auction block, I saw someone fighting to stay whole in a world determined to break her. I saw courage and dignity and strength that humbled me. And something in me recognized something in you. Another survivor, another soul trying to figure out how to keep going when everything hurt. Caleb, please, let me finish before I lose my nerve. He took both her hands in his, feeling them tremble, or maybe that was his own shaking. These past months with you have been the best of my life. You've healed my leg, but that's the least of it. You've healed my heart, Maeve. Made me believe I could be more than just a damaged soldier drifting through life. Made me want to build something lasting. He pulled the ring from his pocket, watching her eyes go wide. I made this for you. It's not much, just wood and time and everything I feel but don't know how to say. And I'm asking if you're willing, if you want this too. His voice broke, emotion overwhelming careful control. Maeve Callahan, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me in that house down there? Will you let me spend every day I have left trying to deserve the gift of loving you? Tears were pouring down Maeve's cheeks, her hands gripping his so tight it almost hurt. For a moment she couldn't speak, could only look at him with an expression that held joy and disbelief, and something so tender it made Caleb's chest ache. Yes, she finally whispered. Yes, Caleb, I'll marry you. I'll build a life with you. I'll love you for as long as I'm breathing and probably longer. He slipped the ring on her finger, this wooden promise he'd carved with trembling hands and uncertain hope. It fit perfectly, like he'd known it would, like some part of him had always known everything about her. Then he kissed her, there on the ridge overlooking their valley, autumn wind tangling their hair together, the world spreading out below them full of possibility. Maeve kissed him back with everything she had, passion and promise and relief that felt like coming home after years of being lost. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Maeve held up her hand, studying the ring in the golden light. It's beautiful, she said. Perfect. How did you know applewood was my favorite? I didn't. Just lucky, I guess. Not lucky. Meant to be. She touched his face, her healer's hands gentle against his scarred jaw. I used to think my life was over, that the best I could hope for was survival. But you've given me so much more than that. You've given me hope. You've given me home. You gave me the same. Maybe that's what love is, giving each other reasons to hope. They stayed on the ridge until the sun began to set, making plans and promises, talking about their future with the ease of people who'd already committed to it completely. They'd marry in the spring, Maeve decided, when the valley was green and warm. They'd have the ceremony at the ranch, invite everyone from Sweet Creek. Sarah could help her make a dress. Michael could stand with Caleb. It would be simple and perfect, a celebration of life after so much darkness. And children? Caleb asked carefully, not wanting to assume. Is that something you want? Maeve's smile was answer enough, but she spoke anyway. Yes, I want children. Want to fill that house with life and laughter. Want to teach them healing like my grandmother taught me. Want to give them the childhood I lost. I'll do everything I can to make that happen. I know you will. That's why I love you. Love. They rode back to the ranch in the gathering dusk, hands linked between their horses, both feeling like they'd crossed some invisible threshold into a future that looked nothing like either had imagined, but everything both had needed. Sarah cried when they announced the engagement, pulling Maeve into a hug that lasted long enough to embarrass everyone. Michael shook Caleb's hand formally, then gave up and hugged him too, both brothers getting emotional in a way neither would have admitted to feeling comfortable with. About damn time, Michael said, his voice rough. Welcome to the family, Maeve. Officially. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep despite being exhausted from emotion and hope. He stood on the porch in his nightshirt, looking out at the ridge where their house waited, and thought about how strange life was. How you could be broken and lost for years, and then one decision, one moment of seeing someone who needed help and choosing to help them, could change everything. He heard the door open behind him, felt Maeve's presence before she spoke. Can't sleep either? She asked, coming to stand beside him. Too much happiness. Don't know what to do with it. Me too. She leaned against him and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. I keep thinking about how close I came to missing this. If Sykes had taken me somewhere else. If you'd ridden through Red Hollow an hour earlier or later. If I'd been too afraid to step forward and help Tommy Morrison. But none of that happened. We found each other, and we're going to build something beautiful. We already have. She held up her hand, the wooden ring catching moonlight. This is already beautiful. The rest is just details. They stood together in the quiet Wyoming night, two people who'd been thrown away by the world and found each other in the discarded places. Two healers learning to mend their own hearts while tending everyone else's hurts. Two survivors who'd decided that surviving wasn't enough. They wanted to truly live. Inside the house, a clock chimed midnight. A new day beginning, a new chapter opening, and for the first time in longer than either could remember, the future felt like something to anticipate rather than fear. I love you, Caleb said into Maeve's hair. I love you too. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving you didn't make a mistake buying a woman at an auction. Best $10 I ever spent, he said, and she laughed, the sound carrying across the valley like a promise. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human drama, but down below two people held each other and believed, finally, completely, that they'd found the healing they'd both been searching for. Not in medicine or distance or forgetting, but in each other. In choosing each other. In building something together that was stronger than the sum of their separate broken pieces. They went inside eventually, back to their separate rooms because propriety still mattered in 1875 Wyoming, even for engaged couples. But they carried the night's promises with them, held close like treasures against whatever darkness morning might bring. And when morning came, bright and cold and full of possibility, they woke to find themselves still engaged, still in love, still building toward a future that looked like redemption. Winter came to Sweet Creek with the kind of beauty that made your breath catch even as it froze in your lungs. Snow covered the valley in white silence, transforming the familiar landscape into something magical and new. The house on the ridge stood finished now, windows glowing warm against the cold, smoke rising from the chimney Caleb had built with his own hands. It looked exactly like home should look, waiting for the lives that would fill it. Caleb spent those winter months working on the interior, determined to have everything perfect before spring. He built furniture, a bed frame from pine, a table sturdy enough to last generations, chairs that didn't wobble. He installed shelves in what would be Maeve's clinic room, carved a mantel for the fireplace, sanded and finished every floor until they gleamed. Each piece of work was an act of love, a promise made solid. Maeve, meanwhile, became the valley's unofficial healer in truth. Doc Reynolds had taken to sending people directly to her, trusting her judgment, consulting with her on difficult cases. She treated everything from colic to broken bones, from difficult births to the lingering coughs that came with high-altitude winters. And every patient she helped became another voice singing her praises, another person who knew beyond doubt that Maeve Callahan was blessing rather than curse. The wedding was set for the first Saturday in May, when the valley would be green and the wildflowers would be blooming. Sarah threw herself into preparations with enthusiasm that would have been overwhelming if it wasn't so genuine. She'd already started on Maeve's dress, cream-colored muslin with lace Sarah's mother had sent from Ohio, simple and elegant and perfect. But it was in January, on a night so cold the stars looked close enough to touch, that everything Caleb thought he understood about his future shifted one more time. He and Maeve were in the new house, checking on recent work, making sure the pipes he'd installed weren't freezing despite the weather. They'd lit a fire in the hearth, and the room glowed warm and intimate. Maeve stood at the window, looking out at the snow-covered valley, and something about her stillness made Caleb's instincts prickle. "What's wrong?" he asked, crossing to her. She turned to face him, and her expression held joy and fear in equal measure. "I need to tell you something. I've been trying to find the right moment, but there never seems to be a perfect time, so—" She took a shaky breath. "Caleb, I'm pregnant." The world seemed to stop, everything going quiet except for the crackle of fire and his own suddenly thundering heartbeat. "You're... what?" "Pregnant. About 2 months along, I think. I know we're not married yet. I know people will talk, but..." Tears started down her cheeks. "I'm happy about it, Caleb. Scared, but happy. And I hope you are too." He couldn't speak, could barely breathe. A baby. Their baby. Life they'd created together growing inside the woman he loved more than his own existence. The enormity of it crashed over him like a wave, threatening to drag him under. Maeve misread his silence, her face crumpling. "If you're angry, I understand. We should have been more careful. I should have known better. I'm not angry." He found his voice finally, rough with emotion. "Maeve, I'm not angry. I'm—" What was he? Terrified, elated, overwhelmed, grateful. "I'm going to be a father." He said it out loud, testing the words, and felt them settle into truth. A father. Him. The broken soldier who'd spent 13 years convinced he had nothing to offer. The world was going to have a child. Was going to get the chance to do better than his own father had, to build something that mattered more than anything he'd ever built before. "Are you all right?" Maeve asked, searching his face. Caleb pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully like she was made of glass. "I'm better than all right. God, Maeve, this is—" His voice broke completely. "This is everything I never knew I wanted. Thank you." She laughed through her tears, clutching him back. "You're thanking me? For trusting me with this, for giving me a family, for—" He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "For making me believe I could be someone worth being." They stood there in their almost finished house, holding each other while snow fell outside and fire crackled inside. Two people who'd survived everything the world had thrown at them and somehow come out the other side with something beautiful taking root. "We need to move the wedding up," Caleb said eventually, practical matters asserting themselves. "I won't have people calling our child a bastard. People will count months on their fingers regardless of when we marry. Let them count. As long as we're married before the baby comes, that's what matters." He placed his hand over her still flat stomach, awed by the life growing there. "When?" "Late summer, I think. August, maybe early September. So they'd have 5 months as husband and wife before becoming parents. 5 months to figure out how to be married, how to run a household, how to build the foundation their child would grow up on. It felt simultaneously like plenty of time and nowhere near enough. "We should tell Michael and Sarah," Maeve said. "They'll need to know we're moving the wedding up." "Tomorrow," Caleb agreed. "Tonight, I just want to be here with you, in our house, thinking about our future." They stayed until the fire burned low, talking about names and hopes and fears, planning for a life they could barely imagine but desperately wanted. When they finally rode back to the ranch, the cold had deepened, but neither felt it, warmed from within by news that changed everything. Michael and Sarah took the news with grace, congratulating them both without a hint of judgment. Sarah immediately began recalculating wedding plans, determining they could move everything up to February if they pushed hard. "No point waiting until May now," she said practically. "Better to get married soon, let you settle into the house, have everything ready before the baby comes. We can do February 14th, Valentine's Day. Romantic, don't you think?" So February 14th it was, just 5 weeks away. 5 weeks to finish the house completely, to finalize arrangements, to prepare for vows that would bind them legally as well as emotionally. It felt rushed and perfect all at once, urgency underlining choices they'd already made in their hearts. The valley rallied around them with the kind of support that made Maeve cry almost daily. Women brought household goods, teaching Maeve their recipes and tricks for Wyoming living. Men helped Caleb finish the last details on the house, installing the final doors, building a chicken coop, splitting enough firewood to last through next winter. Tommy Morrison's father crafted a beautiful cradle from cherry wood, intricate and strong, a gift acknowledging the life Maeve had saved and the new life she carried. But it was in late January, with the wedding 2 weeks away, that the past came knocking in a way neither had anticipated. Caleb was in town buying supplies when he saw them. 3 men riding in from the east, dressed too formally for ranch work, carrying themselves with the authority of law. His instincts, honed by war and wandering, immediately screamed danger. He watched them dismount at the sheriff's office, watched them go inside, and felt dread settle cold in his gut. He found Sheriff Morrison, Tommy's father, a man who'd become a friend, coming out of his office with a troubled expression. "What's wrong?" Caleb asked without preamble. Morrison glanced around, then pulled Caleb aside. "Those men are federal marshals. They're looking for someone, an Irish woman wanted for murder back in Philadelphia. Woman named Maeve Callahan. The world tilted. What did you tell them? Nothing yet. Told them I'd ask around, see if anyone knew anything. Morrison's eyes were serious. Caleb, is your Maeve the woman they're looking for? There was no point lying to a friend. She didn't murder anyone. She tried to save a child who was already dying. The family needed someone to blame, and she was convenient. I figured it was something like that. Woman who saved my son's life isn't a killer. Morrison rubbed his face, clearly troubled. But these men have legal papers, a warrant signed by a federal judge. They say she was convicted, that she escaped lawful indenture. They're authorized to take her back for hanging. Hanging. The word hit Caleb like a physical blow. They wanted to hang Maeve, wanted to put a rope around her neck and kill the woman he loved, kill the mother of his unborn child, kill the healer who'd saved lives across this valley. No, he said flatly. That's not happening. Caleb, I can't ignore a federal warrant. You can and you will. She's innocent, Jim. You know that. Your son knows that. Everyone in this valley knows that. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, internal struggle evident on his face. Finally, he sighed. They're planning to search the valley systematically, asking at every ranch, every homestead. I can't stop them. They have legal authority. Best I can do is delay them a day or two, give you time to figure something out. Like what? I don't know. Hide her, move her, get married faster, so she has legal protection as your wife, though I'm not sure even that would stop a federal warrant. I'm sorry, Caleb, I owe Maeve my son's life, but I also swore an oath to uphold the law. Caleb understood. Morrison was a good man in an impossible position. Give me 24 hours, please. 24 hours. After that, I have to tell them what I know. Caleb rode for the ranch like demons were chasing him, because in a way they were. He found Maeve helping Sarah in the kitchen, laughing at something, her face lit with the kind of happiness he'd spent months helping her build. The sight of it made his chest ache, made him want to rage at a world that wouldn't just let them be happy. Maeve, I need to talk to you, now, privately. Something in his tone made her smile fade. She followed him outside, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the cold. What's happened? He told her everything. The marshals, the warrant, the 24 hours they had before Morrison would be forced to reveal what he knew. He watched her face go pale, watched old fear return to eyes that had finally learned to trust safety. They want to hang me, she said, voice hollow. They're really going to hang me for trying to save a child. No, Caleb took her shoulders firmly. No, they're not, because I won't let them. You can't stop federal marshals, Caleb. You're one man. I'm one man who loves you more than life itself. I will burn down the world before I let them take you. He meant it absolutely, and she must have seen that in his face because some of the panic eased. What do we do? I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. He pulled her close, his mind racing through possibilities. They could run, but that would mean abandoning everything they'd built here. They could hide her, but eventually she'd be found. They could fight, but fighting federal law rarely ended well. Or they could do what should have been obvious from the start. We're getting married, Caleb said suddenly. Today. Right now. Caleb, I don't think marriage will protect me from a federal warrant. Maybe not legally, but it will protect you practically. You'll be my wife, part of the Rourke family. And this valley loves us. If federal marshals try to take you, they'll have to go through me, through Michael, through every person whose life you've touched. They'll have to face down Tommy Morrison's parents and everyone you've healed. They'll have to justify to this community why they're taking away the woman who saved their children and eased their pain. Understanding dawned in Maeve's eyes. You want to make it so politically difficult that they give up. I want to make it impossible. I want them to look at Sweet Creek and see a community united behind you and decide it's not worth the fight. It was a long shot, he knew. But it was the only shot they had. They gathered everyone quickly, Michael and Sarah, Sheriff Morrison, the minister, Doc Reynolds, anyone they could reach on short notice. By evening, the ranch house was full of people who'd come because Caleb and Maeve needed them, who'd dropped everything to stand witness. The ceremony was hasty but heartfelt, conducted in the Rourke's living room with firelight and lanterns for illumination. Maeve wore the dress Sarah had been making, barely finished. held together with temporary stitches in places, but beautiful nonetheless. Caleb wore his good suit, his hand shaking as he held Maeve's, as he spoke vows that meant everything. I take you, Maeve Callahan, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death parts us. And I vow that nothing, not law, not men, not anything in this world, will take you from me as long as I have breath to fight. Maeve's voice was steady, despite tears streaming down her face. I take you, Caleb Rourke, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death parts us. And I vow to build a life with you worth fighting for, worth protecting, worth everything we've both survived to reach. The minister pronounced them man and wife, and when Caleb kissed his bride, the room erupted in cheers that felt like defiance as much as celebration. They were married now, united. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. The marshals arrived at the ranch the next morning, just as Sheriff Morrison said they would. Caleb watched them ride up from the porch of his house, their house now, his and Maeve's, and felt Maeve's hand slip into his. I'm scared, she whispered. I know, me too, but we're not alone. And they weren't. Michael stood on Caleb's other side, solid and steady. Sarah waited inside with several other Valley women, ready to add their voices. Down the road, Caleb could see other riders coming, neighbors who'd heard what was happening, who were choosing sides. The lead marshal was the hard-faced man named Clayton, with cold eyes that had seen too much and cared too little. He dismounted with his companions, official papers in hand, and walked up to the porch with the confidence of someone who'd done this 100 times before. I'm looking for a woman named Maeve Callahan, he said without preamble. Wanted for murder and escape from lawful indenture. I have reason to believe she's here. My name is Maeve Rourke now, Maeve said, stepping forward, her voice clear and strong. I'm this man's wife, and I'm not going anywhere. Clayton's eyes narrowed. Marriage doesn't negate a federal warrant, Mrs. Rourke. You're still wanted in Philadelphia for the death of Robert Whelan. I didn't kill that child. I tried to save him. He was dying when they brought me to him. The fever had already taken hold. I did everything I could, used every skill I possessed, but some people can't be saved. That doesn't make me a murderer. That's for a court to decide. My job is just to bring you in. Clayton pulled out his warrant. This is a legal document signed by a federal judge. You need to come with us. No. Caleb's voice was flat, absolute. She doesn't. Sir, interfering with federal marshals in the execution of their duties is a crime. So is kidnapping an innocent woman. So is ignoring exculpatory evidence. So is not caring whether justice is actually served. Caleb descended the porch steps slowly, putting himself between Clayton and Maeve. Tell me something, Marshal. Have you investigated this case at all? Talked to witnesses? Looked into why a healer with an impeccable reputation would suddenly murder a child? That's not my job. No, your job is just to follow orders. To drag an innocent woman back to hang because someone with money and influence wants her dead. Well, here's what you need to understand. This valley knows Maeve. We've seen her work. She's saved lives here, including that of Sheriff Morrison's son. She's a healer, not a killer, and we're not letting you take her. As if on cue, riders appeared from multiple directions. Tommy Morrison's parents, Doc Reynolds, families Maeve had helped, neighbors who'd come to respect her. Within minutes, the yard was full of people, all of them standing with the Rourkes. Clayton looked around, clearly reassessing the situation. This is still a federal matter. Then make it federal, Michael said, stepping forward. Telegraph your superiors. Tell them a territorial community is willing to stand witness to this woman's character. Tell them we're prepared to fight any extradition. Tell them that taking Maeve Rourke will require force, and we're prepared to meet force with force. It was a bluff, mostly, but Clayton didn't know that. He saw a yard full of armed men and determined women, saw a community united, saw a situation that could turn ugly fast. And whatever else he was pragmatic. I'll need to wire my office, he said finally. Get instructions. You do that, Caleb said. In the meantime, my wife stays with me. In her home. In her community. The standoff lasted 3 days, during which time Maeve never left the house and Caleb never left her side. Messages flew back and forth between Sweet Creek and Washington, between federal offices and territorial authorities. The valley rallied, every voice raised in Maeve's defense. Doc Reynolds wrote a detailed letter about her medical skills. Mrs. Morrison testified about Tommy's healing. One by one, patients came forward with their own stories, their own evidence that Maeve Callahan, Maeve Rourke, was healer, not killer. And then, on the third day, Sheriff Morrison arrived with news that changed everything. The Whelan family withdrew their complaint, he said, barely containing his smile. Seems someone back in Philadelphia started asking uncomfortable questions. Turns out the magistrate was already being investigated for corruption, and the mother admitted under pressure that you'd told her the boy was too far gone, that she'd waited too long to call for help. She blamed you because she couldn't face her own guilt. Maeve swayed, and Caleb caught her, both of them barely able to process what they were hearing. The warrant's been vacated, Morrison continued. Federal marshals are leaving today. It's over, Maeve. You're free. Free? The word didn't seem real, but Morrison had the paperwork to prove it, official documents that cleared Maeve's name completely, that acknowledged the charges had been false from the start. When the marshals rode out an hour later, the whole valley gathered to watch them go. And when they disappeared over the eastern ridge, a cheer went up that echoed across Sweet Creek, celebration of justice, finally, impossibly served. That night, Caleb and Maeve stood in their house, really theirs now. No threat hanging over them, no fear that it would be taken away. Maeve's hand rested on her stomach where their child grew. Caleb's arm wrapped around her shoulders, holding her close. It's really over, she said, wonder in her voice. I'm really free. You were always free, from the moment I cut those ropes, but now the world knows it too. She turned to face him, her hands framing his face. You saved me, again. You and this valley and the community you helped me build. We saved each other. That's how it works. They made love that night in their own bed, in their own house, gentle and reverent, celebrating survival and freedom and the future that stretched ahead, bright with possibility. And when they finished, wrapped in each other's arms, Maeve whispered something that made Caleb's heart soar. I can feel the baby moving, just barely, like butterfly wings inside me. He placed his hand over hers, over the place where their child grew, and felt tears slide down his face. We made a miracle, he said, you and me. We made a family. Spring came to Sweet Creek with wildflowers and warm rain, the valley transforming into the green paradise it had promised to be. Maeve's clinic, the room in their house she'd set up for healing, saw a steady stream of patients, and she treated them all with the skill her grandmother had taught her and the confidence this community had given her. Caleb worked the ranch with Michael, splitting his time between their land and helping his brother expand. His legs still ached, probably always would, but Maeve's treatments kept it manageable. And anyway, pain was just part of living. What mattered was having a reason to wake up each morning, having purpose beyond mere survival. By summer, Maeve was visibly pregnant, her body changing in ways that awed them both. She glowed with health and happiness, her healing work continuing right up until Doc Reynolds insisted she slow down for the baby's sake. You need rest, he told her firmly. Let other people care for you for once. So she did, reluctantly, spending her final months preparing for motherhood while the valley prepared to welcome the newest Rourke. Sarah organized quilting circles that produced blankets and clothes. Tommy Morrison's father finished the cradle and delivered it personally, carrying it up to the house with pride. Women brought advice and casseroles and their own stories of childbirth, weaving Maeve into a web of feminine knowledge and support. On a hot August night, with stars blazing overhead and cicadas singing their endless song, Maeve went into labor. Sarah and Doc Reynolds attended her while Caleb paced downstairs, driven half mad by every cry he heard, every sound that spoke of pain he couldn't ease. Michael sat with him, steady and calm, occasionally handing him whiskey that Caleb didn't drink. She's strong, Michael said for the 100th time. She's a healer. She knows what she's doing. That doesn't make it easier to hear her hurting. No, but it'll be worth it. Trust me. It was dawn when the baby finally came, arriving with the sun, screaming lustily in protest of this bright new world.
Sarah appeared at the top of the stairs, exhausted and beaming. "You have a daughter," she called down, "and she's perfect." Caleb took the stairs 3 at a time despite his bad leg, bursting into the room where Maeve lay propped up in bed, sweaty and tired, and more beautiful than anything he'd ever seen. In her arms, wrapped in one of the quilts the valley had made, was the smallest person Caleb had ever laid eyes on. Dark hair plastered to her head, eyes squeezed shut against the light, tiny fists waving in indignation. "Meet your daughter," Maeve said softly, holding out the bundle. Caleb took her with trembling hands, terrified he'd break something so small and precious. But she settled against him like she belonged there, her crying stopping, her tiny face relaxing. He looked down at her and felt his whole world realign around this 7-pound bundle of possibility. "She's perfect," he breathed. "Maeve, she's perfect. What should we name her?" They'd discussed names for months, unable to decide. But looking at her now, feeling the weight of her in his arms, Caleb knew with sudden certainty. "Hope," he said. "Her name is Hope, because that's what you gave me. That's what we built together. That's what she represents." Maeve smiled through happy tears. "Hope Rourke, I love it." Doc Reynolds checked them both thoroughly, pronouncing mother and daughter healthy. Sarah fussed over Maeve, making her comfortable, bringing water and food. And Caleb sat in the rocking chair he'd built months ago, holding his daughter, watching the sun rise over the valley that had become home. Hope opened her eyes eventually, unfocused but seeking, and when she looked at Caleb, he felt something in his chest crack open. Love, fierce and immediate and absolute. The kind of love that would make him fight armies, move mountains, walk through fire. The kind of love that redeemed everything he'd been and promised everything he'd become. "I'll keep you safe," he whispered to her. "You and your mother, I'll build you a world worth living in, I promise." The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder, of learning how to be parents while still learning how to be married. Hope was a good baby, healthy and alert, seeming to study the world with serious consideration. Maeve healed quickly, her body bouncing back with the resilience of youth and health. By September, she was seeing patients again. Hope sleeping in the cradle nearby. The valley's children learning early that healing and nurturing went hand in hand. October brought the first anniversary of Tommy Morrison's accident, the night that had introduced Maeve to Sweet Creek as healer rather than stranger. The valley threw a celebration, ostensibly for Tommy's recovery, but really honoring Maeve and everything she'd brought to their community. Caleb watched her move through the crowd with hope on her hip, accepting thanks and affection with the grace of someone who'd finally learned she deserved both. She'd stopped looking over her shoulder for threats, stopped flinching when strangers approached, stopped believing the world was out to destroy her. She'd learned to trust happiness, and in doing so, she'd taught him the same lesson. That winter, their second in Sweet Creek, Caleb stood on the ridge behind their house watching smoke rise from a dozen homesteads across the valley. His leg ached in the cold, but Maeve would work on it tonight, her hands finding the hurt and easing it the way they always did. Inside the house, Hope was probably waking from her nap, demanding attention with the imperious certainty of a 1-year-old. Maeve would be singing to her, that Irish lullaby her grandmother had taught her, voice carrying warmth and heritage and love. This was his life now. Not the war, not the wandering, not the broken soldier who'd thought he had nothing to offer. This valley, this family, this home built from nothing but determination and hope. Michael appeared beside him, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He passed one to Caleb without speaking, and they stood together in the cold, brothers watching the valley breathe below them. "You did good," Michael said finally, "building this life. You and Maeve both. Couldn't have done it without you and Sarah. Maybe, but you're the one who had the courage to buy a woman nobody wanted, to see past what people said she was and recognize who she actually was. That took guts, brother." Caleb thought about that moment in Red Hollow, about the split-second decision that had changed everything. "I was just trying to do the right thing." That's usually how the best decisions happen. You don't overthink them, you just act. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence, then headed back toward the house where family waited. Caleb's bad leg slowed him down, but he didn't mind. He
He wasn't in a hurry anymore, wasn't running toward anything or away from anything, was just living, day by day, moment by moment, building a life one choice at a time. Inside, Maeve was indeed singing to Hope, and the sound of it stopped Caleb in the doorway, made him pause to appreciate what he'd been given. His wife, rocking their daughter, voice carrying across the years from an Irish grandmother to an American grandchild. Heritage and hope, memory and future, all wrapped up in a simple lullaby. Maeve looked up, saw him watching, and smiled. "Are you going to stand there all day, or come help me with your daughter?" Just appreciating the view. Flatter her. But she was pleased. "Come here, Hope wants her father." He crossed to them, took Hope from Maeve's arms, marveled as he always did at how much bigger she seemed every day. She grabbed his nose, laughing at her own daring, and Caleb felt his heart expand in that way that parenthood teaches. Infinite capacity for love, infinite willingness to be changed. "I've been thinking," Maeve said, settling back in her chair, "about expanding the clinic, maybe building a separate structure, something with more room. Doc Reynolds is getting older. He's talked about retiring, about me taking over most of the Valley's medical care. You'd be good at that. Great at it, actually. It would mean more work, more time away from you and Hope. It would also mean more lives saved, more people helped. That's worth the sacrifice." Caleb shifted Hope to his other hip. "We'll figure it out together like we figure everything out." And they would, because that's what they'd learned to do, face challenges together, support each other's dreams, build something larger than either could have managed alone. It wasn't always easy. There were still hard days, still moments when old wounds ached or old fears resurfaced, but they'd learned to weather those storms together, to be each other's anchor and sail both. Spring arrived again, bringing green to the valley and warmth to the world. On a Sunday in April, with wildflowers blooming across the meadows, and Hope taking her first wobbly steps, Caleb and Maeve stood on their porch watching the sun set over the mountains. "I never thought I could be this happy," Maeve said quietly. "After everything that happened, I thought happiness was something other people got, not me." I felt the same way. Figured I'd used up my share of joy in the war, that all I had left was surviving. But we were wrong. Yeah, we were. Caleb pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. "We saved each other, Maeve. You know that, right? It wasn't just me saving you in Red Hollow. You saved me right back. Saved me from a life that was barely living, gave me a reason to stop running." She turned in his arms, looking up at him with eyes that held everything they'd survived and everything they'd built. "You bought me for $10. Best investment you ever made? Best investment anyone ever made. $10 for a lifetime of love. For a family, for a home. Hell, I'd have paid 1,000 times that if I'd known what I was getting." "A flatterer," she said again, but she was smiling. "Love you, Caleb Rourke. Love you too, Maeve Rourke, today, tomorrow, and every day after, until there aren't any days left." They kissed as the sun painted the sky gold and crimson, as Hope played at their feet with the wooden blocks Caleb had carved, as Sweet Creek settled into evening around them. Two people who'd been thrown away by the world and found each other in the discarded places. Two healers who'd learned to mend their own hearts while tending everyone else's wounds. Two survivors who discovered that surviving wasn't enough. You had to live, truly live, with all the risk and pain and glorious possibility that entailed. Inside the house, the fire crackled warm. Outside, the valley stretched green and peaceful. Above, stars began to emerge one by one, ancient light finally reaching Earth. And here, on this porch, on this spring evening, a family stood together watching day become night, watching the ordinary miracle of another day survived and celebrated. Years later, when Hope was old enough to understand, they told her the story, about the auction block where her mother had stood in ropes, about the limping cowboy who'd bid $10 when no one else would, about the journey west and the storm that nearly killed them, about the boy who fell from a hayloft and the healing that earned acceptance, about federal marshals and a valley that stood united, about courage and love and the choosing that made family real. Hope would grow up knowing she'd been born from that courage, would grow up in a house built by her father's hands and blessed by her mother's gift, would grow up watching her parents work side by side, building a life that honored everything they'd survived to reach. And maybe, just maybe, she'd learned the lesson they'd both learned the hard way. That broken things can heal, that thrown away people can find home, that love, real love, the kind that sees you at your worst and chooses you anyway, was worth any price you had to pay. Including, once upon a time in a dusty Wyoming town, the price of 10 silver dollars, and the courage to say yes when everyone else said no. That was the story. That was how it began. And in all the years that followed, through all the joy and sorrow and ordinary miracle of living, that remained the truth they built everything else on. They'd found each other. They'd chosen each other. And in doing so, they discovered the healing they'd both been searching for all along.